Ursula von der Leyen really wants to get something in place for an oil embargo. Hungary, though, is dead set against it. There are other countries that are dead set against it as well, though they're not as vocal as Hungary. You could say Slovakia, Czech Republic, even Greece is not too keen on an oil embargo, given the effect that it will have on oil tankers and the shipping of oil. But Ursula von der Leyen, she's trying to cobble something together, some exemptions for Hungary and the Druzhba pipeline, giving an embargo for sea transport of oil, giving them 8 months to figure things out. She desperately wants to say that she got an embargo in place. On the flip side, and they're having a meeting today, tomorrow, and they're going to try to figure it out. On the flip side, she gave an interview to MSNBC to Mika Brzezinski, and she said that the EU has to buy Russian oil, because if they don't buy Russian oil, well, then Putin is going to sell that Russian oil on the world markets for higher prices, and they have to buy the Russian oil in order to weaken Putin's war chest. So before you get into it, Alexander, I talked about this on my morning video, but one of the commenters in that video said van der Leyenomics. In other words, a new school of economics, Leyenomics. And here is the first rule of Leyenomics. The first rule of van der Leyenomics. You know, we have the Austrian school, the Keynesian school. Here is the first rule of Ursula von der Leyenomics. In order to damage the economy or profits of your competitor, buy as much of that competitor's products and services, thereby preventing them from selling those products or services on world markets for higher prices. What do you think, Alexander? That's a good idea, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. I mean, it just proves that Ursula von der Leyen is an economic genius. I mean, Adam Smith and Alexander Hamilton and John Maynard Keynes and all these great luminaries, Mises and Freeman and all of Friedman, Milton Friedman, all these people. Well, obviously they must now step aside, because we have this new intellectual colossus who's come along and has explained how economics works, and why the more of somebody's products you buy, the poorer that person becomes. I mean, it's the logic is just unshakable. I mean, you can't really argue with it. Well, I am going to try and argue with it. First of all, let's make a quick observation. Today, oil prices hit $120 a barrel. I mean, not everywhere, not all the various grades of oil, but oil prices are rising once more. We're told on supply concerns, but of course, when people talk about supply concerns, what they really mean is they're worried about the fact that Ursula and her sidekick, Robert Habeck, the German economics minister, who's also vice chancellor in the German government, are running around beating, on doors, EU doors, trying to get an oil embargo on Russia together. So it's pushing up prices. And the mere fact that they're talking about this is pushing up prices. Now, as you absolutely rightly say, more and more countries are now unhappy. Hungary is absolutely vocal. They don't really agree with this at all. You mentioned Slovakia, you mentioned the Czech Republic, you mentioned Greece. I suspect that deep down, the country that's the most concerned of all is Italy, actually. And we've now had comments from the Italians. They're trying to float together some kind of peace deal. Mario Draghi, the Prime Minister of Italy, telephoned Putin a few days ago, trying to float some idea of, looking to see whether the Russians are in the mood to compromise. And of course, immediately after Mario Draghi called Putin, Nehammer, who's the Austrian Chancellor, also called Putin. And as you very well covered on one of your videos, and as I've also touched on one of mine, Olaf Scholz and Emmanuel Macron, the two terrible twins, they also telephoned Putin. So all of these people have been calling Putin. They're all getting increasingly worried about where all this is going. They can't find a way out. And in the meantime, you've got Robert Habeck and Ursula von der Leyen continuing to press on, demanding more and more oil embargoes. Now, what I heard this morning was that the EU ambassadors, the way the EU works is that the ambassadors of the member states get together in a committee, in which, by the way, the United States is also represented, a fact which isn't widely known, but apparently they have a permanent representative on this committee. Anyway, EU ambassadors meet. They're presented with a plan by the Commission. They vote for it. If they all vote for it, it's approved and is then ratified by the EU Council. If they don't all vote for it, then it's not approved, and there have to be either further discussions or the thing is dropped. Well, according to the BBC, there was a discussion amongst EU ambassadors this morning. There was no agreement about an EU oil embargo. There's supposed to be a proper meeting of the European Council, that's to say of heads of government and heads of state. This is presumably a virtual meeting this afternoon. Orban has previously written to Charles Michel, who is the president of the EU Council, saying that he does not want to discuss the issue of an oil embargo on Russia today. I suspect there's still going to be some attempt to do it. There's now all kinds of talk, weird and wonderful talk. We'll stop shipborne trade in oil and allow pipeline oil to continue to flow through the Druzhba pipeline. We'll do this and that and something else. In other words, we'll deny ourselves some oil and not other oil. Various people are pointing out that this is all that will do is create distortions within the EU's oil market. But as you say, the hardliners, the Ursula von der Leyens, the Habecks, those people simply can't let this thing go. I suspect that until and unless there's a final decision in the EU Council, unless until Hungary or other states like supporting Hungary actually veto this proposal, it will just go on and we'll be coming back to it week after week after week. But yesterday, the Financial Times had a piece quoting Robert Habeck. Habeck was saying that the EU support for sanctions is crumbling, that it's getting weaker by the day, and you can see that. I don't think they ever thought that this sixth package would prove as difficult to agree as it has has proved to be the case.
Because it's Habeck and Brabach, these Greens, and Ursula all really fighting to get some sort of oil embargo in place. This has nothing to do with Russia, does it really? It has to do with the green agenda. I mean, I think in that MSNBC article, Ursula von der Leyen even admitted it, where she said that Russia has pushed away its best customer, and she said, and I'm paraphrasing, she said, and that's a good thing in the long run because we'll be able to move towards renewables. She kind of hinted at the fact that we want renewables, and so Russia's given us the perfect excuse to do this, to force this on our citizens. That is the real reason why all this is happening. They want that renewable energy, Green New Deal, green agenda, and Russia's provided them the perfect excuse to put it in place.
Absolutely, that's exactly right. That is totally, completely, and exactly right. So you use the excuse of the war in Ukraine. That's certainly what the Greens want. I mean, they don't want fossil fuels. They consider they hate fossil fuels, as they made very clear. So this is their perfect opportunity to ram through massive cutbacks on fossil fuels so that they can build more windmills, more solar stations, and the EU Council, Ursula and co, go along with it, partly because, to be straightforward about it, Ursula hates Russia. She clearly does. I don't know why, but she obviously does. But beyond that, of course, this is a massive increase in EU power because, of course, they're able that way to use the institutions of the EU to impose the green agenda across Europe. And that, of course, gives the EU Council, the EU bureaucracy in Brussels, another major role it can apply. And of course, it's a disaster for German industry. It's a disaster for Italian industry. German industrialists have been warning against it. Italian industrialists are warning against it. More and more people are unhappy. But the propaganda, if you like, on this green thing has been relentless now for 20, 30 years. And of course, on top of that, we've had the relentless propaganda against Russia as well. They've all come together, and it's proving incredibly difficult to slow this to slow this down, to prevent the basic destruction, if you like, of European industry. And about a week ago, Vladimir Putin had a meeting in Moscow with oil chiefs and energy chiefs in Moscow. And essentially, he made exactly the same point that you've just made, that this is all about the green agenda. It's not really about Russia at all. I would add one comment to Ursula's point, which is that I don't think the EU has been a good customer of Russian energy. I think the EU has been a terrible customer of Russian energy. I mean, all right, they've paid a lot, but I mean, it's been one psychodrama after another, extending back now 20 plus years. I mean, they've been trying to get the Russians to take the third energy package. They've pursued all kinds of legal cases against Gazprom and Rosneft. They've threatened sanctions. They've, of course, imposed sanctions. They've demonized, abused, ridiculed the Russians at every opportunity. I think the Russians, far from being sorry to drop this difficult, impossible, cantankerous, and abusive customer, will be delighted to let it go.
Yeah. So you have record gas prices pretty much across Europe, across the EU. You definitely have them in the UK. I don't know if they're record, but I mean, you tell me. I'm getting
Well, they're
reports
right. Absolutely, yeah.
that the price for
They're very
petrol
bad.
is going through the roof. Yeah. The US the same. I heard it's approaching $8 in California. I mean, $10 a gallon, I think is a given. It's just
Yeah,
it's going to
yeah,
happen.
yeah.
It is going to happen. The ends justify the means for the Greens, doesn't it? People are going to have to suffer for 10, 15, 20 years. It doesn't matter. They're going to have to make difficult choices about whether to feed themselves or whether to heat their homes. But for the Greens, the ends justify the means. Meanwhile, Alexander, in our locals community, this was a post from one of our locals members, the Duran.locals.com, where they point out the fact that Russia is now bailing out Sri Lanka, and they are providing oil and other energy, petroleum products for Sri Lanka, which is in desperate need of those products. And the comment in the locals post is brilliant. It says, "I guess those shock and awe sanctions are having their effect. Russia is so hurt by them, they are bailing out third world countries." In other words, this is not hurting Russia at all, and they've got plenty of markets to sell their oil to.
Absolutely, because not everybody is as crazed as people in Europe and to some extent the United States have become. I think in the United States, I mean, I don't want to underestimate the power of the green agenda in the United States. It's incredibly influential with the Biden administration. But I think still overall in the United States, it's all about geopolitics. In Europe, the green agenda is the dominant thing. But of course, the rest of the world doesn't share either the geopolitics or the green agenda to anything like the same degree. They're much more pragmatic about it. And of course, they need fossil fuels, and they need food, and they need chemical fertilizer, and they need all of these things. And of course, who's got them? They will get them from the Russians. And of course, the Russians may not get quite as high prices as they got from the Europeans, but they'll be free, as I said, of all the psychodrama, the tantrums, the finger pointing, the harassment, the abuse, and all of that. And as I've said many, many, many times, in any business relationship, in any commercial relationship, being able to get on with your customer, and if you're the customer, being able to get on with your supplier, and the two having mutual respect and trust for each other, is every bit as important in the end as the price. Because what businesses need is long-term stability in energy prices, in energy supply, in the long-term relationships which they forge with each other. And where there is trust, and if, shall I say, mutual respect, you get that. And where there is no trust and no respect, you don't. And any commercial player knows that and will invariably go with a reliable, safe, sensible, rational customer that doesn't constantly cause him problems. Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, 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 yeah. No. I still believe that eventually they will get some kind of embargo. I mean, the irresistible force is going to overcome the immovable obstacle because, I mean, Orban can do so much. He'll probably carve out protections for himself and for Hungary. But sooner or later, these people, Ursula and Habeck and all these people, will get their way because they shout down everybody who stands in their way, and they will do it. So what they will do is they will pursue their green agenda. They will close down all the nuclear power stations. That's still absolutely the agenda, apparently. They're not retreating from that 1 millimeter. They will have more of these windmills, which are already covering the European countryside. And I get to say it, I personally find them hideous to behold, but
Hate them.
I
Hate them.
hate them. I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, but
So disgusting. Yeah.
I know, absolutely. I mean, I think that far from improving nature, they're destroying it. But that's my that's my aesthetic thing. I can't possibly imagine a more horrible looking thing in the middle of the beautiful pristine countryside than row upon row of giant windmills. I mean, to me, they look like the sort of things that come from Mars in an H.G. Wells novel. I mean, that's what they look to me like. But anyway, I mean, that's an aesthetic consideration. We'll have more of them. We'll no doubt try a bit with solar panels. We'll do lots with batteries. We'll muck around with hydrogen. But fundamentally and ultimately, there is no simple substitute for fossil fuels, and not with the existing technologies, especially if you're closing down your nuclear power stations. So, unless some great new technology comes along, which is possible, but even that will take time. Even if we say crack the problems of nuclear fusion today, we're not realistically going to have nuclear fusion power stations for at least a decade, probably much longer, and we haven't cracked it. So unless some great new technology comes, we are denying ourselves the simplest, cheapest, most reliable fossil fuels available, whereas others around the world are not. And when all is said and done, we still live and exist in industrialized economies that have to produce things and consume things. Others who have cheaper fuel, cheaper energy, cheaper food will become more competitive, and we in Europe will become less competitive. We've discussed this already. Deindustrialization in Europe is on the way. Now, I've been hearing accounts about, how I heard a very, very interesting account from someone. I don't want to go into the details because this is a bit personal, but they were describing their interactions with the German welfare state and the German health system and the enormously extraordinary service that they're able to get from those. But that depends ultimately on taxes and insurance payments that are funded from well-paid jobs and from successful and thriving industrial businesses. If you take all of that away, all that welfare, all those things start to erode, as we've seen in country after country which is deindustrialized. Britain is a case in point, and you can't sustain it. So the European social model the great social democratic models that were created in the 20th century, they're going to go. That's the future of Europe. But it's the one that Habeck and Baerbock and Ursula and all of those want for us. And note that this is not a capitalist project. It's not, doing away with welfare states so as to release more funds for investment in industry, because your project is not to, provide opportunities for entrepreneurs. It is to close those entrepreneurs down. I cannot imagine a more suicidal economic project than this. But there we are.
Well, let's throw two more things into the disintegration of the welfare state in Europe. Let's put the fact that European countries now are going to spend, EU countries are going to spend a lot more, according to what they've said, on defense, i.e. Germany said they're going to now spend 100 billion on defense because of the whole Ukraine thing. So that's going to be money that could have been used for social services that will now go to the military industrial complex. You can talk about Finland and Sweden as well. These are countries that are going to maybe enter NATO. That's a different video for a different time, but they're going to have to also move some of the funds that would have been put towards social services into NATO and defense spending. So that's going to be a big hit on social benefits in Europe. And put in there, from what I've read, around 6 to 8 million Ukraine refugees who are now living in countries. Most of those countries are the quote unquote prosperous EU countries in the north, the Germanys, the Polands, the Netherlands, all of these, Hungary, all of these countries where they're scattered around. But the big hit is Poland, Germany, and they're going to have to. Czech Republic, I read an article, the Czech Republic is now trying to grapple with social benefits and Ukraine refugees as well. I mean, someone's going to have to take care of these people at the expense of your citizens.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's going to happen is you're going to do one of two things. One, you're going to raise your taxes. That's probably one thing they're going to do, because, to be straightforward about it, that's what governments do. Of course, you can borrow more, but there are problems. There may be constraints in borrowing if you're functioning within the Eurozone. But we'll park that to one side. But you're going to raise taxes to some extent to meet these social security payments. But the pattern, the iron rule, is that when tax revenues start to decline because your industry isn't there, you are going to have to cut your social spending, because your social spending is not going to your own citizens, it's going to this incoming movement of people. To some extent, you have to find something for them, or at least that's what you're going to tell your own people. And at the same time, you can't afford as much anyway. So the welfare systems, which were created in the 20th century, are going to buckle and they're going to break. They're not designed for this thing. They were not designed for mass immigration on this scale. And of course, they depended on the proceeds of business and industry. Now, of course, if you're going to spend money in the military industrial complex, you are going to do one of two things. Firstly, if you're Germany, you have some companies that can produce military products. Remember, they're going to be less competitive in civilian products because they're buying more for, they're having to spend more on energy costs. So they will probably switch increasingly, as has happened in the United States, and to some extent in Britain. They're going to have to switch to arms production. And of course, that's going to create another parasitic sector within your economy. It's going to reduce the part of your industrial economy that is involved in production of consumer goods that you sell on your own market and on global markets. That will make your economy even less competitive. It will increase taxes generally because you have to pay for all of these arms. You're going to have to buy some of these arms from the United States, because even if we have factories and industrial groups in Germany that can produce some weapon systems, They can't produce all of these weapon systems, so they will have to import more from the United States. Germany's trade surplus is going to disappear. It's going to go into deficit, long historic trade deficit. As I said, and that is going to intensify even further import penetration and the whole process of deindustrialization. Last but not least, you build up big defense systems, defense industries, and you're going to follow the American and British model because that is the model. That is the only model that exists in the West. Inevitably, that will bring corruption in its wake, as we've seen both in the United States and in Britain. It's extraordinary to think that we're going down this route, and notice that it's the Greens who are propelling us along it.